Okay, don't watch this video if you're expecting something particularly upbeat or positive. This is probably going to be a very depressing video. I'm going to be expressing my cynicism. Let's start with this graph. What you're seeing here are the divorce rates in Australia, my country, in a single year, 2017. And you can see that obviously in the first year, there's not many divorces. People are still in that honeymoon phase. But after 3 or 4 years, people are like, nope, this was a mistake, and then they're getting divorced. And it does decrease from there, but even that doesn't really express a huge amount of optimism for the success rates of marriage because, I mean, maybe people have worked through their issues, but a lot of marriages are just codependent and really dysfunctional, and two people are too scared to be alone, so they stick it out together. Like you listening to this right now, think of it. How many genuinely functional relationships do you actually know of? That really high figure is just how many divorces happen after 30 years. Now, my job is to understand how relationships work, to explain it to you guys, relationship dynamics, sexuality, dating, the differences between men and women. But when I look around at the relationships that I see in the real world, I honestly, so often at the time, have no idea how those two people got together or are staying together. When I hear that divorce rates are at an all-time high, that doesn't surprise me. I'm amazed that there are any relationships working at all. And this might not make sense. Like, Alexander, aren't you the guy on YouTube that's like pro-relationships, you know? Like, you're very positive. What's with all of this cynicism? Yeah, I get that. I understand why this might seem a little bit out of left field, but understand, I am positive about the possibility of relationships. I know that positive relationships can work. So I'm very optimistic and enthusiastic about the potential that humans have to have relationships. But the reality of how most people are functioning in their relationships, or not functioning as it were, is actually an incredibly depressing landscape to look at. The situation is bad. There are more people single than ever before, and the people in relationships, those relationships are dysfunctional, they're toxic, people are codependent, they're abusive. In trying to make sense of all of this, the conclusion that I've basically reached is that romantic relationships are reserved for extremely high-functioning people, and that's it. At least functional relationships where the dynamics aren't just totally disastrous. Each person has to be an incredible individual with really high self-esteem and really well educated in styles of communication and understanding and respecting differences. That's really it. That's all. It's just that tiny demographic of people who can actually have functional relationships. In order to make a relationship work, you need to have intelligence. You need to have emotional self-awareness. You need to be committed to growth. You need to show a lot of courage. Lazy people, you know, entitled people, they just can't make it work. They might get into relationships, but those relationships are going to end up being codependent and dysfunctional. I saw this TikTok that explains what I'm talking about perfectly. It's all of these women at a party sort of explaining all of the terrible behaviors that they put up with from men. There's this girl in particular. I wanted to play her. Yeah, watch this.
The bar I set for men is so low that when he comes to pick me up for a date and he actually knocks on the door, I'm ready to propose. Yay!
It's a bizarre clip. The women are trying to make the point of like the bar's set so low for men, but they're really just embarrassing themselves by showing how little standards they have. It was the subject, like me and my buddy Matt, we talked about this clip in a lot of depth in the latest video that I posted on Patreon. So if you want to check that out, that video is a deeper discussion about who actually has lower standards in the dating market, men and women. Really interesting video. But this girl explaining that she's ready to propose to a man who simply comes and knocks on the door, it demonstrates how little regard she has for her own value, how low her self-esteem is. How on earth is a person like that possibly going to make a relationship work? If I was going to summarize my perspective on this, here's what I'd say, is that you cannot possibly make a romantic relationship work with another person until you have individuated. That's the standard. Once you know yourself as an individual, then you can seek a relationship. And that relationship has to be based off some common goal, some mutual sharing of values. Now, sometimes you'll find couples that have a common set of values, but they haven't really individuated. And those relationships can work for a short period of time, but they're extremely fragile. So think of like a religious couple, but both people didn't really challenge their parents' religions. They just sort of went along with it. And they're like, oh, you know, we have these values in common. Let's get together over that. Or maybe, each person is like really driven and ambitious and they're all just about their money, and they can form like a kind of money-centric partnership, and that'll work for a little bit of time. But the reason why I say that those relationships are incredibly fragile is because they don't actually allow room for each person to individuate and change and grow. Like if one person just wakes up and discovers that they're an atheist, they never believed what their parents believed, or one person decides they want to drop out of the rat race, they're not interested in money anymore, they want to move to some mountain town and open an arts and crafts store. That's them growing, that's them changing, but the relationship is not going to be able to accommodate that because growth and change wasn't built into the couple's shared values. But this is what is so dangerous, because people are often so lonely that they're rushing into relationships before they actually know who they are as an individual. They don't really have any individual personality. They don't have any specific identity to speak of. Maybe they have a few preferences and values here and there, but they've largely just been inherited from their parents or from the wider culture. You know what I'm talking about? Like that mainstream lifestyle. They get a degree, they get a job, they have a couple of kids, they drink beer, they watch TV. There's just nothing really remarkable or unique about their life. Now, I'm not actually saying that there's anything wrong with that lifestyle. Like, I'm not criticizing, the suburban dream, whatever. Actually, compared to so many of the lives out there, that's probably one of the more preferable ones. But this is my point, is that so many people are following that path not because they've actually looked deep inside themselves and understood who they are, what makes them unique, even have any self-awareness about what their preferences, what their true values are. They're just going along with that life because that's what everybody else is doing. They're just conforming to the culture's values. It would be absolutely insane to consider how many people are living the exact same, like identical lifestyle, and then to come to the conclusion that each person has independently chosen that is the truest reflection of their individual personality. No chance whatsoever. Do you know how precious and unique life is? How many billions of possibilities there are for how you could live? If you're a young guy and you're just out of school, I really want you to pay attention here. I really want you to think deeply and to try and answer this question. Do you know what you want? Like, really? Do you know how you feel about things? Do you know what your values are? Do you know what you want to do with your life? How well do you know yourself? Do you know what makes you different from the person next door and the person in the other country? Have you spent enough time in quiet contemplation, self-reflection? Have you spoken to enough people to really understand yourself inside and out so that you are confident that you have sufficient self-awareness of your unique identity? Now, maybe you might say to me, look, I've done that, Alexander. Like, I've done all that self-reflection and I have come to the conclusion that that suburban conventional life, that's for me. I just want to work and I just want to have kids and that's it. Okay, maybe, but understand from my perspective, before I believe you, I'm going to need you to tell me in detail why the other possibilities for life are not for you. For example, you could move to some nudist colony and spend your days growing beans and playing the ukulele. I'm not joking. Like, that might sound completely ridiculous to you, but what I'm challenging you to say is, do you know specifically why you're not choosing that life? Have you even considered it? Or what about the military? Can you give me detailed reasons why you have decided to not join the military? Why that wouldn't be right for you as an individual? Or moving to some Pacific island and living off-grid and just being a fisherman. Can you explain to me why that's not the right life for you? Maybe you could be an activist. Maybe you could be a monk. My fundamental question is, have you considered all the possibilities for your life? It doesn't really matter which one of these you choose. What's important is that whatever life you decide to choose, it is in reference to you. You are different to me. You're different from everybody else. There's something about you that makes you unique. And so your life should reflect that uniqueness. And now, to bring this back to romantic relationships, do you understand that unless you know what makes you different, what makes you special, unique, all of that stuff, how on earth are you going to be able to choose the right partner? Just like there are lots of different lives that you could be living, there are lots of different women out there, a huge variety of personalities. They're not interchangeable. And my concern is that if you don't know yourself really well, if you don't have it really clear what your values are, then how on earth are you going to make the right choice of a woman? And what kind of a relationship are you possibly going to have? If you don't know yourself and you choose a woman who's equally self-ignorant, then you're just going to be clumsily bumping into each other. You don't have any shared values to give reference to in your relationship. So who knows what direction your life together is going to lead? It's no wonder the divorce rates are so high, because the men and the women, they don't have a clear understanding of which direction they want to go. And so they end up competing with each other, and it just becomes a mess. It's so sad, but inevitably, so many people see their significant other as a competitor, whereas they should be your teammate. But in order for them to be your teammate, you need to have that shared value system. So, I mean, what is it? Like, let's say you do a bunch of self-reflection and you discover that you're a deeply religious person. That's going to help. You've got to find somebody of the same religion. Or maybe you're not interested in working very hard, so you want to buy a small plot of land and be a homesteader. Great, no worries. Find a woman who wants to do that too. Or maybe family is really important to you. You want to have like 6 to 10 kids. Okay, fine. Find a woman who has the same values. But if you don't know yourself, you're just a regular average guy who just has the same value systems that mainstream society has, and you find some girl who's equally kind of bland, there's nothing to keep you together. Both of you are incredibly replaceable to each other. There's actually nothing unique or special that's holding your bond together. I'm reminded of those trashy like reality dating shows, and I think as an audience member, it's never clear when they find these basic people and put them on the TV screens why any one of these couples should function any more than the other. You know, the people seem highly interchangeable. People who are in dysfunctional relationships right now are listening to this, nodding their head going, yep, I know what he's talking about. I got together with my girlfriend before I knew myself. Now I've been growing and changing in this direction, and, you know, she's not changing. She's still the same person, and we're fighting all the time. Of course you are. That's inevitable. And here's perhaps the deeper question is, how do you actually know that you even want a relationship until you know yourself? I mean, most guys say they want to be in a relationship, they want to be with women, but do they really understand the actual source of that desire? Are they just horny? Are they just trying to gratify their sexual needs? Or is there some kind of psychological insecurity they're trying to meet through another person? Like a lot of people, they'll actually prefer to discover their identity through another person than actually to do that difficult self-work to discover their own identity and stand on their own 2 feet. It's a complete disaster, especially when men are doing it, because it flips the polarity of masculine and feminine around. Like you, as a man, you're meant to be your own island. You're meant to figure out your own life. And then women come along on their boats and they see what it's like to live on your island. And if it's a match, then you two can live happily together. But if you're a man who's acting like a boat and you're trying to, you know, live for free on women's islands, like live through them, find your identity through a woman, it's never going to work. That's not what masculinity does. If you don't know yourself, if you don't have any identity, you're not going to be able to make a relationship work. It's guaranteed to become codependent. And that's the fundamental basis of my cynicism, is that when I look around at the state of psychological health of the general population, I don't think that many people have that much self-awareness. I think a lot of people are just trying to conform to somebody else's views, somebody else's expectations of them. True high-quality individuals, both men and women, are extremely rare. But I'm not backing down from what I said earlier. Genuinely healthy relationships, people who are finding their relationships make them happy, not miserable, those are reserved for those high-quality individuals. And I'm reminded of Ayn Rand's quote here: to say I love you, one must know first how to say the I. It's a wonderful quote. It's from The Fountainhead. Howard Rourke says that. And the reason that it really brings this point home is because it speaks to that solidity of identity that you need to know that I am me. This is who I am before you can engage with another person, because otherwise you're just going to lose yourself. In so many relationships, it seems as though the couple is the prime identity and the two individuals don't even exist, and they just both have this weird, vague energy fighting for control of that relationship. But it's a complete disaster, because relationships don't really exist. They're kind of an abstraction. It's a sort of arrangement. In terms of what's actually real, objectively speaking, you as an individual, you are real, you exist. There's a consciousness coming from you that is solid. That has to be prime. That has to be the base of the pyramid. That has to be the foundations of everything they're building on top of it. Whereas if you flip that and you try and place your relationship above your own individuality, it's not going to work. And so if you're not in a relationship, if you're single at the moment, now is the time to do this work. You know, I know that you've got these urges and you're feeling lonely and all that stuff. And it seems as though the most important thing in the world right now is for you to find a girlfriend. But I'm telling you, if you don't know yourself first, then that's the relationship that needs to take primacy. You need to be spending your time focusing on yourself. What you don't want to happen is to start a relationship with a woman based on some vague, undefinable, semi-connection that you seem to have, and then later on down the line to find that the two of you are going in different directions, but you've already merged finances, you've already had children, now you hate each other. What a disaster. I actually asked Matt in one of our recent Patreon videos what he does when somebody comes to him asking if it's the right thing for them to do to stop focusing on women, to focus on himself. And his advice was absolutely, too many men are trying to find their identity in a relationship. From there, we had this whole conversation about the men going their own way movement, going monk mode, all of that stuff, the degree to which women are going to tolerate that. It was a great episode. So to finish up, I'll just remind you that you can access that episode plus the episode that I referenced earlier about who actually has lower standards, men or women in the dating market. They're exclusive to Patreon. That's where you find the more nuanced stuff. The YouTube videos are always going to be a little bit shorter, a little bit flashier, but on Patreon, there's really time to actually slow down and just unpack all of this stuff with the appropriate amount of depth. So if you want to access that, come join me on Patreon.